The following 10 movie shots, many of them quite innocuous, had ludicrous amounts of effort put into small details that the overwhelming majority of viewers wouldn't even really think about, in turn dialing in on even the most minor things most people won't ever notice. So I'm Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 10 movies that put insane effort into tiny details. Number 10. Making a giant journal for one shot. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a mesmerizing marvel of practical effects wizardry, as executed by director Francis Ford Coppola's son Roman, where even seconds-long shots had a back-breaking amount of work put into them. Case in point, the memorable shot where Jonathan Harker is writing in his journal while taking the train to Transylvania wasn't achieved through clever cutting-edge compositing, but an ingenious fusion of practical effects techniques. During the shot, the smoke from the train casts a shadow across the journal. A surreal and expressionistic touch that couldn't be achieved by simply placing a journal in front of the camera lens with the miniature train set in the background, because the shadow wouldn't travel that distance. For the shadow to appear on the journal, the production had to create an oversized 20-foot journal prop, which was placed in front of the train set as it was blasted with light, causing the smoke to cast genuine shadows on the journal's pages. It's a shot which would almost certainly be accomplished with VFX today, but back in 1992, Coppola's desire to see those shadows required his prop team to pull out all the stops. All this for a shot which, while gorgeous, lasts a grand total of 7 seconds. Number 9. Making the Agent Smith extras wear Hugo Weaving masks. The Matrix Revolutions. For The Matrix Revolutions' epic final battle, Neo battles Agent Smith while an unfathomable number of Smith duplicates are seen watching from the sidelines. While you probably assume this was achieved by digitally pasting Hugo Weaving's likeness onto hundreds of extras in post-production, similar to how the burly brawl was achieved in The Matrix Reloaded, the Wachowskis actually settled on a surprisingly practical solution. The threequels effects team took a cast of Weaving's face, from which they created countless masks, which were then given to the scene's innumerable extras to wear in the front row. For the further back Smiths, less likely to get picked up on camera in detail, the crew simply put some of the masks on mannequins. And as the Smiths are all wearing sunglasses and the scene was captured in low light conditions, it passes the sniff test perfectly. All the same though, didn't we all just assume it was figured out in a VFX house after the fact? Number 8. Creating the pod racing crowd from 450,000 cotton buds. Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. Though Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace is often dismissed as an excessively digital nightmare like its two immediate sequels, it actually has considerably more practical effects than either Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. And here's just one example of the painstaking detail that the effects technicians went into. For the pod racing sequence, George Lucas enlisted ILM model maker Michael Lynch to create the stadium audience through practical means. Lynch achieved this by painting cotton buds and sticking them to a model crowd stand. And to give the impression of a packed crowd, the miniature set had 450,000 cotton buds stuck to it. A fan was then used to blow the buds around slightly and imply the movement of the crowd, all for a series of shots that almost everyone watching probably thought were achieved with some basic crowd duplication effects in post. But no, those were some energetic cotton buds right there, folks. Now I've got a quick question for you. What is your favourite practical effect in movie history? Was it something from Star Wars? And speaking of Star Wars, we've got a Star Wars What Culture channel that you need to go and check out as well if you've not already. You'll have a good time, I promise. Number 7. Lighting a freeway for a 20-second shot. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. One of the major benefits of working on bigger budget productions is the sheer number of outrageous things you're able to do in the pursuit of a killer shot. And the $100 million budget of Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood allowed him to light an entire freeway for a mere 20-second sequence. There's a brief scene in the middle of the movie where stuntman Cliff Booth goes for a breezy drive around Hollywood. And behind-the-scenes images from shooting show that Tarantino not only had a portion of the freeway shut down down, he had many gigantic lights rigged up on cranes 50 feet in the air across said freeway. It is an astonishing amount of time, effort, money, and sheer manpower considering we only see Cliff driving along the freeway for about 20 seconds, but it nevertheless ensured that Brad Pitt's gorgeous mug and car were appropriately lit throughout. All the same, few filmmakers can command quite such resources. Most would either have to make do with the ambient nighttime freeway lighting, or augment it a little more creatively, that is, cheaply. Not everyone's got gigantic light money. Number 6. Building an entire rotating set to manipulate props. Inception. Now you're almost certainly aware that Christopher Nolan had a rotating hallway built for Inception's iconic gravity-defying hotel fight. But Nolan also employed a similar technique in decidedly subtler fashion elsewhere in the film. There's a scene where Robert Fisher is approached by Cobb in the hotel bar, and because it's happening in a dream within another dream, the instability of the dream causes the laws of physics to start wobbling. This is demonstrated by objects in the bar, such as lights, swaying around. And while you might have assumed that Nolan pulled this off with nothing more than fishing wire and pulleys, that wasn't the case at all. Nope, Nolan actually had a bar set built on a giant gimbal that could be mechanically tilted, allowing the lights and the liquid inside drink glasses to move naturally according to the rules of gravity. Now the exception, of course, is that camera equipment had to be bolted down to stop it moving, and extras had to audition to prove their ability to remain seated during the tilting. Sure, that was a fun meeting. Given that the effect isn't nearly as intense as in the hallway fight, it's both impressive and baffling that Nolan went to such lengths for something so comparatively minor. Still looks awesome though, so it was just about worth the effort. Cheers for checking out this fascinating list today, my friend. And if you are enjoying your fine self, then hit that subscribe button down below and you're gonna get more of these What Culture videos in your life. Sounds like a happy life to me. Number 5. Using real Harvard IP addresses. The social network. Though perhaps not quite as bewilderingly effortful as most of the feats on this list, you still have to hand it to David Fincher and his arguably unnecessary attention to detail on the social network. For an early scene where Mark Zuckerberg is monitoring the internet traffic to his website FaceMash, a slew of IP addresses are faintly visible on the screen briefly. And believe it or not, these are actual IP addresses belonging to Harvard University. But before you question the responsibility of Fincher including real IP addresses in a movie where they can be easily noted down and potentially attacked, it's worth knowing that said IPs are freely available from a lookup request. Now while it's not nearly as wild as playing with almost 500,000 cotton buds, or building a giant rotating set for just a few shots, the fact that Fincher made the effort to include accurate IPs rather than including any old string of numbers, for a damn wide shot no less, is certainly a testament to his obsessive, fastidious filmmaking style. Number 4. Hand-knitting Coraline's clothes. Even her socks. Coraline. Leica's debut film, Coraline, immediately cemented the studio's reputation as a meticulous company of artists who give 150% to every single shot of their movies. And there's no better proof of that than the lengths the crew went to in order to make its world and characters feel totally lived in. For Coraline's clothes, a professional miniature knitter, Althea Crome, was hired, requiring her to use teeny tiny knitting needles and figure out which thread gauges would look the most realistic up close on camera. The craft is extremely impressive, but here's where the effort goes up to arguably absurd levels. Crome didn't merely knit the clothes which would appear on screen, she also knitted Coraline's socks, which of course are worn underneath her shoes and never actually shown in the movie. Perhaps the filmmakers were just erring on the side of caution, in case they decided they actually wanted to show Coraline's socks, for whatever reason. Or maybe they were just that committed to going above and beyond. Number 3. Building a lifelike Sigourney Weaver doll for a brief sequence. Alien 3. Behind-the-scenes footage from Alien 3 shows that the production team had a staggeringly lifelike doll made of Sigourney Weaver, which was presumably used for the short sequence near the start of the film where Ripley is recovered from the prison's beach by medical officer Clemens. Even so, considering the impressively realistic and surely very expensive nature of the doll, was it really worth the considerable time and effort making it, rather than simply having Charles Dance carry Weaver for real? Now it is possible the doll was created for health and safety safety reasons, to allow Dance to perform the scene without physical strain or risk of harming Weaver. Yeah, given how an unconscious Ripley is shown almost entirely in low light conditions and distant shots while being carried, this level of detail still seems hilariously unnecessary, right? Some fans have theorized that a prop this elaborate was originally intended for another sequence which was cut from the film though, considering how Alien 3's script was continually reworked on the fly throughout shooting. But if it was only made for this one scene, then that is a lot of effort for a tiny detail. Number 2, using a hand-painted background for one scene, Tenet. Even accepting Christopher Nolan's commitment to doing things the hard, practical way, this story about an early scene in Tenet is absolutely wild. You'd never know it from watching, but in the scene where the protagonist meets up with scientist Barbara, the corridor behind the pair is actually a painting. A behind-the-scenes featurette reveals that, for whatever reason, the decision was made to blend the practical set with a painting to give the illusion that the corridor extends much further back than it actually does. A painter was flown in from England to create the photorealistic painting. And even more impressively, they did the whole thing freehand. The end result is absolutely mind-boggling, perfectly blending in with the actual set, though likely aided somewhat by the scene's relatively shallow depth of field. Though the overwhelming majority of filmmakers today would likely just use a green screen to extend a set, Nolan instead opted for a more old-school in-camera trick that's impressively invisible, if arguably a ludicrous amount of effort for something nobody's really paying attention to anyway. Number 1, eliminating reflections with mattes, Knives Out. Eliminating reflections on film sets to ensure crew and equipment aren't visible can be extremely tedious, with filmmakers often either resorting to removing as many reflective surfaces as possible from the shot, digitally painting out unsightly reflections, or just, living with it. But for Knives Out, cinematographer Steve Yedlin came up with an ingenious in-camera method for getting rid of pesky reflections, disguising lighting equipment as windows. For scenes where lighting diffusers would be visible in the glasses of characters played by the likes of Daniel Craig and Jamie Lee Curtis, Yedlin had mattes created which had the pattern of the nearby window on them. When these mattes were placed in front of the diffusers, they would be reflected in the glasses instead, blocking out the diffusion and totally convincing the audience that we're simply seeing the window from the scene reflected in the glasses. Now, it's a fairly lo-fi solution compared to other entries on this list, sure, but the commitment to fixing reflections practically rather than relying on clean up in post is definitely laudable, so we salute you, Yedlin, good job.